My name is Emma Rodriguez, and I'm 22 years old. 3 months ago, I thought my graduation day would be the proudest moment of my life. Instead, my parents handed me disownment papers right before the ceremony, calling me a worthless investment who'd never amount to anything. They said I was dead to them, that they regretted every penny spent on my education. But when the CEO of Morrison Tech called my name as their newest Chief Innovation Officer, with a 7-figure salary, and my parents' faces went white as sheets, I realized this was just the beginning of the most satisfying revenge story of my life. What happens when the family who abandons you discovers they've made the biggest mistake of their lives? And what would you do if you had the power to either forgive or make them pay? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever experienced family betrayal like this, hit that like button. Subscribe because this story has twists that'll make you question everything about family loyalty. You won't believe what happened next. Growing up in the Rodriguez household meant living in the shadow of my older brother Marcus. From day one, my parents made it crystal clear who their favorite was. Marcus got the brand new car for his 16th birthday, while I got a used bicycle from Goodwill. When Marcus barely scraped by with C's in high school, my parents celebrated his effort. When I graduated valedictorian, they said I was showing off and making Marcus feel bad. The favoritism wasn't subtle. During family dinners, Marcus would regale everyone with stories about his mediocre college parties, while I sat quietly, knowing that any mention of my academic achievements would be met with eye rolls or comments about how I was too serious for my own good. My parents funded his expensive business degree at a private university, no questions asked. When I got accepted to Stanford with a partial scholarship, they told me they couldn't afford the remaining tuition even though I knew they'd just bought Marcus a new BMW. I worked 3 jobs throughout college: tutoring, waitressing, and coding freelance projects late into the night. While my classmates partied and networked, I was building apps and websites for small businesses, slowly building a portfolio that would later become my ticket to success. Every semester I called home, hoping for some encouragement, some sign that they were proud of what I was accomplishing despite their lack of support. Instead, I got guilt trips about how I'd abandoned the family by going so far away for school. My mother would passive-aggressively mention how Marcus visited every weekend, how he was such a good son who cared about family. She conveniently forgot to mention that Marcus lived 20 minutes away, while I was working myself to the bone 3 states over. The worst part wasn't the financial abandonment or the emotional neglect. It was the gaslighting. When I'd bring up the obvious favoritism, my parents would act shocked, claiming they loved us equally. They'd point to the one birthday card they sent me each year as evidence of their care, while completely ignoring the fact that Marcus got lavish birthday parties and expensive gifts. My extended family knew the truth, but they stayed silent. Aunts and uncles would give me sympathetic looks at holiday gatherings, but no one ever spoke up when my parents would publicly praise Marcus while barely acknowledging my existence. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, where everyone could see the damage happening, but no one wanted to intervene. By senior year, I'd stopped expecting anything from them. I'd built my own support network at school, found mentors who actually believed in my potential, and started working with a startup that was developing revolutionary AI technology. While my parents were planning elaborate celebrations for Marcus's graduation from his mediocre program, I was quietly being headhunted by some of the biggest tech companies in Silicon Valley. The night before graduation, I made one last attempt to connect with them. I called to share my excitement about the offers I'd received, hoping that maybe this time they'd show some pride in their daughter. Instead, my father cut me off mid-sentence to tell me about Marcus's new job at their friend's accounting firm. A position that was clearly handed to him through nepotism. That's when I knew I was done trying to earn their love. I'd spent 22 years competing for affection that was never going to come my way. But I had no idea that they were about to take their rejection to a level that would shock even me, setting in motion a chain of events that would ultimately destroy their perfect little world. Graduation morning arrived with California sunshine streaming through my dorm window. I'd been up since 5 a.m., too excited and nervous to sleep. After 4 years of relentless work, sacrifice, and proving myself, I was finally going to walk across that stage. I had every reason to feel proud. I was graduating summa cum laude with a degree in computer science and engineering. I had multiple job offers from Fortune 500 companies, and I'd just finished a thesis on artificial intelligence that my professors called groundbreaking. But more than any of that, I was excited because my parents had actually agreed to come. It had taken 3 phone calls, and what I now realize was my mother guilt-tripping me about how hurt they were that I hadn't invited them properly. I should have seen the red flags in how reluctant they seemed, how they kept asking if Marcus could bring his girlfriend, how they seemed more interested in the logistics of their hotel than in celebrating my achievements. I met them at the campus coffee shop 2 hours before the ceremony. My mother was wearing the same black dress she wore to funerals, which should have been my first clue. My father looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, checking his phone every 30 seconds and barely making eye contact. Marcus had come too, despite not being invited, bringing his flavor-of-the-month girlfriend who spent the entire time taking selfies and complaining about how boring the campus was. Emma, my father said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointment I'd grown accustomed to over the years. We need to talk before the ceremony starts. My stomach dropped. Even on my graduation day, they couldn't just be proud of me. There had to be drama, there had to be some way to make it about them and their disappointments. My mother reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a manila envelope. The kind lawyers use for important documents. We've been thinking a lot about your future, honey, and we've come to some difficult decisions. I stared at the envelope, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe they were finally going to help with my student loans. Maybe they'd written me a check for graduation. For one naive moment, I thought this might be their way of finally showing they cared. What's in the envelope? Mom, Marcus smirked, and that's when I knew this was going to be bad. Really bad. He'd known what was coming. They'd probably discussed it at family dinners while I was busting my ass at Stanford, completely oblivious to what they were planning. These are disownment papers, my father said matter-of-factly, as if he was discussing the weather. We're officially severing all family ties with you, effective immediately. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stumbled backward, my hand reaching for the nearest chair to steady myself. What? What are you talking about? My mother's voice was cold, clinical. You've made it clear that this family isn't important to you. 4 years of barely visiting, of acting like you're better than us with your fancy school and your big dreams. We're tired of pretending we're proud of a daughter who clearly doesn't want to be part of this family. The irony was suffocating. They were disowning me for the very behavior they'd created. I'd stopped visiting because every trip home was an exercise in humiliation. I'd stopped sharing my dreams because they'd spent years crushing them. And now they were punishing me for protecting myself from their constant rejection. You're joking, I whispered, my hands shaking as I stared at the legal documents. This is my graduation day. This is supposed to be. What a celebration! My father laughed bitterly. A celebration of what? You throwing away everything we taught you. You've become selfish, ungrateful, and frankly we're embarrassed to call you our daughter. Marcus was practically glowing with satisfaction. This was his moment. With me officially out of the picture, he'd have their undivided attention forever. No more worrying about his sister outshining him, no more dealing with the awkward reality that the disappointment of the family was actually more successful than the golden child. The girlfriend was recording everything on her phone, probably planning to post it on social media later. The whole thing felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life implode. We don't want anything more to do with you, my mother continued. Consider this a clean break. You've made your choices and we've made ours. I looked around the coffee shop, suddenly aware that other families were having normal pre-graduation conversations. Parents expressing pride, siblings offering support, grandparents beaming with joy. And here I was, being legally disowned by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But as I stood there holding those papers and watching my family's smug expressions, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and overwhelming, but underneath it was something else. Relief. And determination. They thought they were destroying me, but they had no idea they'd just set me free to become everything they never believed I could be. I sat through my graduation ceremony in a complete daze, clutching those disownment papers in my sweaty palms while trying to process what had just happened. Around me, thousands of proud families cheered as their children's names were called. I watched classmates beam with joy as they walked across the stage, their parents screaming and taking pictures, their siblings holding up embarrassing childhood photos. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and instead I felt completely alone in a sea of celebration. My parents had left immediately after delivering their bombshell. They didn't even stay for the ceremony. 22 years of being their daughter, and they couldn't spare 2 hours to watch me graduate summa cum laude from one of the most prestigious universities in the world. Marcus had lingered just long enough to whisper, "Maybe now you'll learn some humility," before following them out. As names were called alphabetically, I started rehearsing what I'd do when they called mine. Walk across the stage with dignity. Shake the dean's hand. Smile for the photographer. Don't think about the fact that no one in the audience would be cheering for me. Don't think about how I'd be celebrating alone tonight while my classmates went to dinner with their families. Then something unexpected happened. Before we continue with our graduates, Dean Morrison announced, his voice booming across the stadium, "I'd like to invite my son, CEO James Morrison of Morrison Tech, to make a special announcement." A murmur went through the crowd. James Morrison was Silicon Valley royalty, a 35-year-old tech genius who'd built Morrison Tech from a garage startup into a billion-dollar AI company in just 8 years. He was known for being reclusive, rarely making public appearances, and certainly never speaking at graduation ceremonies. He walked to the podium with quiet confidence, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Good afternoon, graduates and families. I'm not here to give a speech. I know you're all eager to celebrate. I'm here because 3 months ago one of your graduates submitted an application to Morrison Tech that fundamentally changed how our company thinks about artificial intelligence." My heart started racing. 3 months ago was when I'd submitted my portfolio and thesis to several companies, Morrison Tech being one of them. I'd never heard back, so I'd assumed they weren't interested. This student's work on predictive AI algorithms was so innovative, so far ahead of anything we'd seen, that we immediately restructured our entire research and development division around their ideas. Today, I'm here to offer them a position as our Chief Innovation Officer. The stadium fell silent. CIO at Morrison Tech wasn't just a job. It was a position that tech magazines regularly featured on their most influential under 30 lists. The current CIO had just left to start his own company, and everyone in Silicon Valley had been speculating about who would fill the role. "Emma Rodriguez." James Morrison called into the microphone, his voice echoing across the stadium. "Would you please join me on stage?" The world stopped. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what was happening. Around me, my classmates were turning to stare, their faces showing the same shock I felt. Emma Rodriguez, the quiet girl who worked constantly and barely socialized, the one whose family hadn't even stayed for the ceremony. "Emma Rodriguez," he repeated, scanning the crowd. "I know you're out there. Your work is extraordinary, and Morrison Tech wants to offer you a 7-figure starting salary to lead our innovation team." 7 figures. At 22 years old. As a new graduate, somehow my legs started moving. I stumbled toward the stage, my graduation cap askew, those disownment papers still crumpled in my fist. The walk felt like it took forever, with every eye in the stadium tracking my movement. I could hear whispers rippling through the crowd, camera phones clicking, people trying to figure out who this Emma Rodriguez was, and why James Morrison himself had come to recruit her. When I reached the stage, James Morrison extended his hand with a genuine smile. "Emma, I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your thesis on predictive algorithms was brilliant. It's exactly the kind of forward thinking we need at Morrison Tech." I shook his hand, still feeling like I was in a dream. I can't believe this is happening." "Believe it," he laughed. "Talent like yours doesn't come along often. We're prepared to offer you a starting salary of $1.2 million, full benefits, stock options, and your own research team. What do you say?" The stadium erupted. Students were cheering, parents were taking pictures, and somewhere in the chaos, I heard my name being chanted by classmates who'd barely acknowledged my existence for 4 years. But the only thing I could think about was my parents' faces that morning. How certain they'd been that I was worthless. How confident they were that disowning me was the right choice. How Marcus had smirked when they'd handed me those papers. They had no idea what they'd just given up. No idea that they'd just disowned the daughter who was about to become one of the youngest executives in Silicon Valley history. As I stood there on that stage accepting congratulations from one of the most powerful men in tech, while thousands of people cheered, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete validation. Not from my family. I was done needing that. But from the world recognizing my worth. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. My parents thought they'd ended our relationship that morning, but they had no idea they'd just started a story that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a moment where the people who doubted you realized they'd made a massive mistake. And don't forget to subscribe, because this is where the real revenge begins. You won't believe what I did next. The weeks following graduation passed in a whirlwind that I still can't fully believe actually happened to me. Moving to San Francisco, signing contracts that made my student loan debt look like pocket change, and stepping into the gleaming Morrison Tech headquarters as their youngest chief innovation officer in company history felt surreal. But the most surreal part was the complete radio silence from my family. Not a single phone call, not a text, not even a passive-aggressive Facebook message from my mother asking why I hadn't told them about the job. They had no idea what had happened at graduation because they hadn't bothered to stay. They'd disowned me so completely that they'd missed the moment their worthless daughter became a millionaire. I threw myself into work with the same intensity I'd brought to college. The difference was that now people actually valued what I had to offer. James Morrison paired me with a team of brilliant engineers who treated my ideas with respect and enthusiasm. My predictive AI algorithms were already being integrated into Morrison Tech's flagship products, and tech blogs were starting to notice the innovations coming out of our department. 3 months into the job, I was featured on the cover of Tech Innovation Weekly as one of the rising stars reshaping Silicon Valley. The article detailed my journey from unknown graduate to tech executive, complete with quotes from James Morrison calling my work revolutionary. When the magazine hit stands, my LinkedIn exploded with connection requests and interview offers. That's when the first crack in my family's wall of silence appeared. My Aunt Maria, my mother's sister, sent me a Facebook message. "Mija, I saw your magazine cover at the grocery store checkout. I'm so proud of you. Your mother mentioned you were working in computers, but she didn't tell us about any of this. Call me when you get a chance." Aunt Maria had always been the family truth teller, the one who couldn't keep secrets or pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. If anyone was going to break first, it would be her. I called her that evening, and within 5 minutes she'd spilled everything. "Your parents are going crazy trying to figure out what happened," she told me. Her voice filled with that gossipy excitement she got when family drama was unfolding. "Your mother keeps asking me if I've heard from you, but she's trying to act like she doesn't care. Last week she accidentally brought up your computer skills when Marcus was complaining about not being able to fix his laptop." "What about Marcus?" I asked, genuinely curious about how my golden child brother was handling my success. "Oh honey, that boy is struggling. Remember how your parents got him that job at their friend's accounting firm? He got fired 2 weeks ago for showing up late and arguing with clients. Your parents are trying to keep it quiet, but everyone knows. He's been living in your old bedroom ever since, and your mother is having to cook for him like he's still in high school." The irony wasn't lost on me. While I was building AI systems that were revolutionizing an entire industry, Marcus couldn't hold down a basic desk job. While I was being featured in national magazines, he was unemployed and living with our parents. The golden child had tarnished quickly once he stepped into the real world. But Aunt Maria wasn't done with her updates. "Emma, I have to tell you something else. Your parents don't know about any of this success you're having. They think you're just working some regular computer job somewhere." "Wait, what? They haven't looked me up online. They haven't seen the articles." "Mija, your parents barely know how to use Facebook. They have no idea how to Google someone or find articles online. In their minds, you're probably struggling somewhere, proving them right about disowning you. This revelation changed everything. My parents weren't ignoring my success. They literally had no idea it existed. They'd gone 3 months believing they'd made the right choice, thinking I was out there learning hard lessons about family loyalty, while they enjoyed their golden child. That's when I started planning phase 2 of what I was already thinking of as my revenge tour. I hired a private investigator. Something I never thought I'd do. But Morrison Tech's salary made a lot of previously impossible things suddenly very possible. I wanted to know everything about my family's current situation before I made my next move. The report came back 2 weeks later, and it was even better than I'd hoped. My parents were struggling financially. My father's small business was failing, hurt by the pandemic and his inability to adapt to digital marketing. My mother had been laid off from her retail job and was having trouble finding new work. They'd taken out a second mortgage to pay for Marcus's college and his car, and now with him unemployed, they were carrying all that debt alone. Marcus wasn't just unemployed, he was unemployable. The private investigator had found social media posts showing him partying during work hours, bad-mouthing previous employers, and generally displaying the kind of entitled attitude that makes hiring managers run the other way. But the most interesting discovery was about their social circle. My parents had spent years bragging to their friends about Marcus while barely mentioning me. Now they had nothing to brag about, while several of their friends' children were succeeding in impressive careers. They'd become the family, with the disappointment child, and the gossip mill in their small town was brutal. I spent another week debating my next move. Part of me wanted to just let them figure out my success on their own eventually. But the bigger part of me, the part that remembered every dismissal, every comparison to Marcus, every time they'd made me feel worthless, wanted them to know exactly what they'd given up. So I started phase 2, making sure my success became impossible to ignore. I scheduled interviews with major tech podcasts, always mentioning my hometown and my journey from an unsupported college student to Silicon Valley executive. I donated $100,000 to my high school's computer lab, making sure the local newspaper covered the story. I had my assistant send Morrison Tech press releases to every media outlet in my parents' area whenever we announced new innovations. Most importantly, I reached out to my cousin David, who worked for the regional newspaper back home. I offered him an exclusive interview about my journey, knowing he'd never pass up the chance to feature a local success story. The article ran on a Sunday front page of the lifestyle section. Local woman becomes youngest executive at billion-dollar tech company. Complete with photos from my magazine covers and details about my 7-figure salary. According to Aunt Maria, my parents found out about the article when 3 different neighbors texted them congratulations before they'd even had their morning coffee. The phone call came that afternoon. My phone buzzed with my mother's contact photo, a picture I'd never updated from some family gathering years ago, where she was actually smiling. I stared at the screen for 3 full rings, my heart pounding in a way that surprised me. After months of independence and success, I thought I'd moved past caring about their opinion. But seeing Mom on my caller ID brought back all those years of desperately wanting their approval. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. But something inside me needed to hear what she had to say. I needed to know if they felt even a shred of regret for what they'd done. "Hello," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Emma." My mother's voice was different. Smaller, somehow uncertain in a way I'd never heard before. "Honey, we just saw the newspaper article." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. 3 months ago they'd legally disowned me. 3 months ago I was dead to them. And now suddenly I was honey again. "Which article would that be, Mom?" I asked, though we both knew exactly what she was talking about. "The one about your job. About Morrison Tech." She paused, and I could hear my father's voice in the background telling her to put the phone on speaker. "Emma, we had no idea. Why didn't you tell us about this promotion?" Promotion. Not job offer. Not career breakthrough. Promotion. As if I'd simply moved up a step at some company they'd known about all along. "Mom, you disowned me 3 months ago, on my graduation day. You literally handed me legal papers severing all family ties. Why exactly would I call you about a promotion? Another pause. I could practically hear them scrambling to figure out how to handle this conversation. They'd never planned for this scenario where their rejected daughter turned out to be wildly successful. My father's voice came through the speaker, attempting his old authoritative tone but missing the mark entirely. Emma, that whole thing was just. We were upset about how distant you'd become. You didn't mean the legal documents, I interrupted. The ones that explicitly state you're severing all parental rights and responsibilities, because I still have them, Dad. They're hanging on my refrigerator right next to my Morrison Tech contract. The truth was I'd thrown those papers away weeks ago. But I wanted them to know I'd kept them, wanted them to understand that their cruelty hadn't been forgotten just because my circumstances had changed. Look, my mother said, her voice taking on that familiar manipulative tone she used when she wanted something. We were hurt, Emma. You have to understand 4 years of barely hearing from you, of feeling like you'd outgrown your family. I outgrew being treated like I was worthless. I shot back, surprised by the strength in my own voice. I outgrown watching you celebrate Marcus's mediocrity while dismissing my achievements. I outgrew begging for scraps of affection from people who made it clear I was never going to be good enough. That's not fair, my father said, but there was no conviction in his voice. We love you just as much as Marcus. Really, when was the last time you bragged about me to your friends? When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you said you were proud of me? The silence was deafening. Emma, my mother tried again, we want to fix this. We miss you. We've missed you. You've missed me. You disowned me 3 months ago and never once tried to reach out. The truth was I'd thrown those papers away weeks ago. But I wanted them to know I'd kept them, wanted them to understand that their cruelty hadn't been forgotten just because my circumstances had changed. Look, my mother said, her voice taking on that familiar manipulative tone she used when she wanted something. We were hurt, Emma. You have to understand 4 years of barely hearing from you, of feeling like you'd outgrown your family. I outgrew being treated like I was worthless. I shot back, surprised by the strength in my own voice. I outgrown watching you celebrate Marcus's mediocrity while dismissing my achievements. I outgrew begging for scraps of affection from people who made it clear I was never going to be good enough. That's not fair, my father said, but there was no conviction in his voice. They had no idea how much I knew, how thoroughly I'd investigated their lives before deciding to resurface in their orbit. How do you? My mother started to ask. How do I know? Because I'm not the naive college girl you discarded anymore, Mom. I'm the chief innovation officer of a billion-dollar company. I have resources you can't imagine. I have access to information you've never dreamed of. And I've been watching. The only reason you're calling now is because you found out I'm successful. If I was struggling, if I was proving your point about being a disappointment, would you be calling? Of course we would, she lied, and we both knew it was a lie. Where's Marcus? I asked, changing tactics. I heard he's been having some career difficulties. The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that I could practically feel their discomfort through the phone. For the first time in my life, they needed something from me more than I needed something from them. What do you want from us, Emma? My father asked quietly. It was a fair question and one I'd been asking myself for weeks. What did I want? An apology. Money could never buy that level of satisfaction. We made a mistake. We were wrong. Can't we find a way to fix this? For a moment, just a moment, I felt that old familiar tug. The little girl inside me who'd spent years trying to earn their love wanted to say yes, wanted to believe this could be the beginning of the relationship I'd always hoped for. But then I remembered graduation morning. I remembered the smug look on Marcus's face. I remembered the calculated cruelty of timing their disownment for what should have been the proudest day of my life. Some mistakes can't be fixed, Mom, I said softly. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. You made your choice 3 months ago, now live with it. I hung up before they could respond, my hands shaking from adrenaline and something that felt like grief. It wasn't the conversation I'd imagined having, but it was the one I'd needed. They finally understood what they'd lost. They finally realized the magnitude of their mistake. But understanding and regret don't erase 22 years of emotional neglect. They don't undo the damage of choosing favoritism over fairness or cruelty over compassion. The phone rang again immediately, but I declined the call. And the next one. And the one after that. I was done being their second choice. Done being the child they only valued when I could offer them something. Done trying to earn love from people who'd proven they were incapable of giving it freely. That evening, I called Aunt Maria to let her know about the conversation, knowing the family gossip network would ensure everyone heard about it within 24 hours. She listened to the whole story, occasionally gasping or muttering in Spanish. "Mija," she said, when I finished, "I'm proud of you. Not because of your success, but because you finally stood up for yourself. Your parents, they're going to have to learn to live with the consequences of their choices." "And Marcus?" I asked. "Marcus is about to learn that being the favorite child doesn't mean much when that child can't function in the real world. Your parents are going to have to choose between continuing to enable him or facing reality about who he really is." As I hung up with Aunt Maria and settled into my downtown San Francisco apartment, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete peace with my decisions. I'd given my family every chance to love me as I was, and they'd chosen not to. Their loss. But the story wasn't over yet. Because sometimes karma takes longer to work than 3 months. Sometimes justice comes in waves. And sometimes the people who hurt you the most end up needing your help in ways they never imagined. 6 months later, I was leading Morrison Tech's expansion into healthcare AI when the second phone call came. This time, it wasn't my parents begging for reconciliation. It was my mother crying about my father's heart attack. "Emma," she sobbed into the phone, "your father is in the hospital. The doctors say he needs surgery, but our insurance, we can't afford. Please, I know things have been difficult, but he's your father." The medical bills were crushing them. My father's small business had finally failed completely, leaving them with no income and mountains of debt. Marcus, still unemployed and living at home, was contributing nothing except additional stress and expenses. For a moment, I felt that familiar pull of family obligation. The voice in my head that said good daughters help their parents regardless of the past. But then I remembered something my therapist had told me: you don't owe anyone access to your success, especially people who abandoned you when you had nothing to offer. "Mom," I said gently, "I'm sorry, Dad is sick. I truly am. But you need to understand something. When you disowned me, you gave up the right to ask for my help. You can't cut someone out of your life and then expect them to save you when things get hard." "But Emma, family means supporting each other through good times and bad," I interrupted. "It means celebrating each other's successes and providing comfort during failures. You did neither of those things for me. You literally gave me legal documents stating I was no longer your family." The irony wasn't lost on me that they were now facing the same isolation I'd felt at graduation. The difference was that I'd built myself up from nothing while they were falling from a position where they'd had everything and chose to throw it away. "Marcus suggested we call you," my mother admitted quietly, and I nearly laughed out loud at the audacity. "Marcus suggested it. The same Marcus who smirked when you disowned me. The same Marcus who's been living off your support for months while contributing nothing. He suggested you ask your disowned daughter for money. He said you probably feel guilty and would want to help." Guilty. That one word crystallized everything wrong with their approach. They still didn't understand that they were the ones who should feel guilty. They still thought I was the one who owed them something. "I don't feel guilty, Mom. I feel free. Free from the obligation to fix problems I didn't create. Free from the burden of trying to earn love from people who proved they're incapable of giving it." "So you're just going to let your father die?" The manipulation was so blatant, so familiar, that I almost felt nostalgic for it. "I'm going to let you handle your problems the way you expected me to handle mine. Alone. When you disowned me, you taught me that family support is conditional. Well, congratulations, you no longer meet the conditions." After hanging up, I did something that would have shocked the old Emma. I made a donation to the Children's Hospital in my father's name. Not to help him, but to help kids whose families actually supported them. Then I had my assistant send the receipt to my parents, along with a note that said, "In honor of families who don't abandon their children." Over the following months, the Family Gossip Network kept me updated on their situation. My father survived the surgery but faced a long recovery. My mother had to take a job at a grocery store to pay bills. Marcus finally got a job at a fast food restaurant, but quit after 2 weeks because he felt it was beneath him. The golden child was revealing his true colors under pressure, and my parents were finally seeing what everyone else had known for years, that their favorite son was entitled, lazy, and completely unprepared for adult life. Meanwhile, my success continued to soar. Morrison Tech went public, making my stock options worth more than most people see in a lifetime. I was invited to speak at conferences around the world, featured in documentaries about women in tech, and offered positions at companies I'd only dreamed of working for years earlier. But the real satisfaction came from the life I'd built for myself. I had genuine friendships with people who valued my mind and my character. I had mentors who celebrated my achievements without jealousy or conditions. I had created the family I'd always wanted, built from choice rather than obligation. A year after my father's heart attack, I received one final contact from my old life. It was a letter, handwritten, not typed, from my mother. "Dear Emma," it began, "I know you probably won't read this, but I need to say some things I should have said long ago. You were right about everything. We were terrible parents to you. We played favorites, we dismissed your achievements, and we abandoned you when you needed us most. Marcus has shown us who he really is, and we realize now that we spent 22 years investing in the wrong child. Not because of money or success, but because of character. You have integrity, determination, and kindness that we failed to nurture or even acknowledge. We don't deserve your forgiveness, and we're not asking for it. We just wanted you to know that we understand now what we lost. We lost the best thing that ever happened to our family, and it was our own fault." I read the letter 3 times, feeling a complicated mix of vindication and sadness. It was the apology I'd needed to hear, but it came too late to repair the damage they'd done. Understanding your mistakes doesn't erase their consequences. I never responded to the letter, but I kept it. Not as a trophy or a reminder of victory, but as evidence that sometimes karma isn't about punishment. It's about truth, finally coming to light. Today, 3 years after graduation, I'm married to an amazing man I met at a tech conference who loves me for exactly who I am. We're planning a family, and our children will never question whether they're good enough or worthy of love. They'll grow up knowing that real family means unconditional support, not conditional approval. Sometimes, I wonder if my parents see my wedding photos on social media, or if they read about my latest innovations in the tech magazines. I wonder if they regret their choices when they see Marcus still struggling to hold down basic jobs while their disowned daughter builds companies and changes industries. But mostly, I don't think about them at all anymore. The little girl who desperately wanted their approval died the day they handed me those disownment papers. The woman who rose from those ashes is stronger, happier, and more successful than that little girl ever dreamed of being. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-respect? Have you experienced the sweet satisfaction of proving wrong the people who never believed in you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes, the best revenge really is living well, but sometimes, karma needs a little help from consequences. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family drama, justice served, and the power of refusing to accept treatment you don't deserve. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that sometimes cutting toxic people out of your life, even family, is the healthiest choice you can make. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you don't owe anyone access to your success, especially people who abandoned you when you had nothing to offer. Your worth isn't determined by the people who can't see it, and sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. The best revenge isn't always getting even. Sometimes it's getting free.